a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Captain Marvel, DC Comics. Captain Marvel, also known as Shazam, is a fictional superhero appearing in American comic books published by DC Comics. Artist C.C. Beck and writer Bill Parker created the character in 1939. Captain Marvel first appeared in Whiz Comics, published by Fawcett Comics. He is the alter ego of Billy Batson, a boy who, by speaking the magic word, Shazam, can transform himself into a costumed adult with the powers of superhuman strength, speed, flight and other abilities. Based on book sales, the character was the most popular superhero of the 1940s, outselling even Superman. Fawcett expanded the franchise to include other Marvels, primarily Marvel Family associates Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr., who can harness Billy's powers as well. Captain Marvel was also the first comic book superhero to be adapted into film. In a 1941 Republic Pictures serial titled Adventures of Captain Marvel. Fawcett ceased publishing Captain Marvel-related comics in 1953, partly because of a copyright infringement suit from DC Comics, alleging that Captain Marvel was a copy of Superman. In 1972, DC licensed the Marvel family characters from Fawcett and returned them to publication. By 1991, DC had acquired all rights to the characters. DC has since integrated Captain Marvel and the Marvel family into their DC universe and has attempted to revive the property several times, with mixed success. Due to trademark conflicts over another character named Captain Marvel, owned by Marvel Comics, DC has branded and marketed the character using the trademark Shazam since his 1972 reintroduction. This, in turn, led many to assume that Shazam was the character's name. DC later officially renamed the character Shazam and his associates the Shazam family when relaunching its comic book properties in 2011. Captain Marvel/Shazam and his family battle an extensive rogues gallery, primarily arch-enemies Dr. Sivana and Black Adam. The character has been featured in 2 television series adaptations, 1 live-action and 1 animated, by Filmation. An upcoming New Line Cinema/Warner Bros. Shazam feature film is scheduled for release in 2019 as part of the DC Extended Universe, with Zachary Levi and Asher Angel portraying the title role. Captain Marvel was ranked as the 55th greatest comic book character of all time by Wizard magazine. IGN also ranked Captain Marvel as the 50th greatest comic book hero of all time, stating that the character will always be an enduring reminder of a simpler time. Yugo Networks ranked him as one of the top heroes of entertainment, saying, "At his best, Shazam has always been compared to Superman with a sense of crazy, goofy fun." Development and inspirations. After the success of National Comics' new superhero characters Superman and Batman, Fawcett Publications started its own comics division in 1939, recruiting writer Bill Parker to create several hero characters for the first title in their line, tentatively titled Flash Comics. Besides penning stories featuring Ibis the Invincible, Spy Smasher, Golden Arrow, Lance O'Casey, Scoop Smith, and Dan Dare for the new book, Parker also wrote a story about a team of 6 superheroes, each possessing a special power granted to them by a mythological figure. Fawcett Comics executive director Ralph Dye decided it would be best to combine the team of 6 into one hero who would embody all 6 powers. Parker responded by creating a character he called Captain Thunder. Staff artist Charles Clarence, C. Beck was recruited to design and illustrate Parker's story, rendering it in a direct, somewhat cartoony style that became his trademark. When Bill Parker and I went to work on Fawcett's first comic book in late 1939, we both saw how poorly written and illustrated the superhero comic books were, Beck told an interviewer. We decided to give our reader a real comic book, drawn in comic strip style and telling an imaginative story, based not on the hackneyed formulas of the pulp magazine, but going back to the old folk tales and myths of classic times. The first issue of the comic book, printed as both Flash Comics and Thrill Comics, had a low print run in the fall of 1939 as an ashcan copy created for advertising and trademark purposes. Shortly after its printing, however, Fawcett found it could not trademark Captain Thunder, Flash Comics, or Thrill Comics, because all three names were already in use. Consequently, the book was renamed Whiz Comics, and Fawcett artist Pete Costanza suggested changing Captain Thunder's name to Captain Marvelous, which the editors shortened to Captain Marvel. The word balloons in the story were relettered to label the hero of the main story as Captain Marvel. Introduction. Whiz Comics was published in late 1939. The comic's lead feature introduced audiences to Billy Batson, an orphan 12-year-old boy who, by speaking the name of the ancient wizard Shazam, is struck by a magic lightning bolt and transformed into the adult superhero Captain Marvel. Shazam's name was an acronym derived from the 6 immortal elders who grant Captain Marvel his superpowers: Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. In addition to introducing the main character, his alter ego, and his mentor, Captain Marvel's first adventure in Whiz Comics also introduced his arch-enemy, the evil Dr. Sivana, and found Billy Batson talking his way into a job as an on-air radio reporter with station WHIZ. Captain Marvel was an instant success, with Whiz Comics selling over 500,000 copies. By 1941, he had his own solo series, Captain Marvel Adventures, the premiere issue of which was written and drawn by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Captain Marvel continued to appear in Whiz Comics, as well as periodic appearances in other Fawcett books, including Master Comics. Inspiration and success at Fawcett. Inspiration for Captain Marvel came from a number of sources. His visual appearance was modeled after that of Fred MacMurray, a popular American actor of the period, though comparisons with both Cary Grant and Jack Oakie were made as well. Fawcett Publications founder, Wilford H. Fawcett, was nicknamed Captain Billy, which inspired the name Billy Batson, as well as Marvel's title. Fawcett's earliest magazine was titled Captain Billy's Whiz Bang, which inspired the title Whiz Comics. In addition, Fawcett took several of the elements that had made Superman the first popular comic book superhero and incorporated them into Captain Marvel. Fawcett's circulation director Roscoe Kent Fawcett recalled telling the staff, "Give me a Superman, only have his other identity be a 10 or 12-year-old boy rather than a man." Through much of the golden age of comic books, Captain Marvel proved to be the most popular superhero character of the medium, and his comics outsold all others. Captain Marvel Adventures sold 14 million copies in 1944, and was at one point being published bi-weekly with a circulation of 1.3 million copies an issue. Several issues of Captain Marvel Adventures included a blurb on their covers proclaiming the series the largest circulation of any comic magazine. The franchise was expanded to introduce spin-off characters to Captain Marvel between 1941 and 1942. Whiz Comics 1 introduced the Lieutenant Marvels, 3 other boys named Billy Batson, who could also become adult superheroes. Captain Marvel Jr., the alter ego of disabled newsboy Freddie Freeman, debuted in Whiz Comics 5. Mary Marvel, alter ego of Billy's twin sister Mary Batson, first appeared in Captain Marvel Adventures 8. In contrast to Captain Marvel and the Lieutenants, both Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. remained kids in superhero form, and were given their own eponymous books in addition to appearing as the lead features in Master Comics and WoW Comics, respectively. Captain Marvel Jr., and Mary Marvel appeared together as a team in another Fawcett publication, The Marvel Family. In addition, there was a funny animal spin-off character, Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, which was created in 1942 for Fawcett's Funny Animals comic book and later given an eponymous series as well, with Bill Parker having been drafted into World War II. Chief writing duties on the Captain Marvel-related comics stories went to Otto Binder by 1942. C.C. Beck remained as lead artist, and he and Binder steered the Captain Marvel stories towards a whimsical tone that emphasized comedy and fantasy elements alongside the superhero action. Other artists associated with the Marvel family at Fawcett included Pete Costanza, Mac Rayboy, Mark Swayze, and Kurt Schaffenberger. Otto Binder would write over 900 of the approximately 1790 Captain Marvel-related stories published by Fawcett. Several of Captain Marvel's enduring supporting characters and enemies, including the non-powered Uncle Marvel, Talkie Tawny the Talking Tiger, and the villains Mr. Mind and Black Adam, were created by Binder during the mid to late 1940s. Copyright infringement lawsuit and cancellation. Detective Comics sued both Fawcett Comics and Republic Pictures for copyright infringement in 1941, alleging that Captain Marvel was based on their character Superman. After 7 years of litigation, the National Comics Publications v. Fawcett Publications case went to trial in 1948. Although the presiding judge decided that Captain Marvel was an infringement, DC was found to be negligent in copyrighting several of their Superman daily newspaper strips, and it was decided that National had abandoned the Superman copyright. As a result, the initial verdict, delivered in 1951, went in Fawcett's favor. National appealed this decision, and Judge Lundhan declared in 1952 that National's Superman copyright was in fact valid. Judge Hand did not find that the character of Captain Marvel itself was an infringement, but rather that specific stories or super feats could be infringements, and this would have to be determined in a retrial. He therefore sent the matter back to the lower court for final determination. Instead of retrying the case, however, Fawcett settled with National out of court. The National lawsuit was not the only problem Fawcett faced in regard to Captain Marvel. While Captain Marvel Adventures had been the top-selling comic series during World War II, it suffered declining sales every year after 1945, and, by 1949, it was selling only half its wartime rate. Fawcett tried to revive the popularity of its Captain Marvel series in the early 1950s by introducing elements of the horror comics trend that had gained popularity at the time. Feeling that this decline in the popularity of superhero comics meant that it was no longer worth continuing the fight, Fawcett agreed to permanently cease publication of comics with the Captain Marvel-related characters, and to pay National $400,000 in damages. Fawcett shut down its comics division in the autumn of 1953 and fired its comic book staff. Whiz Comics had ended with issue 55 in June 1953. Captain Marvel Adventures was cancelled with 50 in November 1953, and the Marvel family ended its run with 9 in January 1954. Hoppy the Marvel Bunny was sold to Charlton Comics, where a few Fawcett-era stories from that strip were reprinted as Hoppy the Magic Bunny, with all references to Captain Marvel and Shazam removed. Marvelman, Miracleman. In the 1950s, a small British publisher, L. Miller & Son, published a number of black and white reprints of American comic books, including the Captain Marvel series. With the outcome of the National v. Fawcett lawsuit, L. Miller & Son found their supply of Captain Marvel material abruptly cut off. They requested the help of a British comic writer, Mick Anglo, who created a thinly disguised version of the superhero called Marvelman. Captain Marvel Jr. was adapted to create young Marvelman, while Mary Marvel had her gender changed to create the male Kid Marvelman. The magic word, Shazam, was replaced with Kimota. The new characters took over the numbering of the original Captain Marvel's United Kingdom series with issue number 5. Marvelman ceased publication in 1963. But the character was revived in 1982 by writer Alan Moore in the pages of Warrior magazine. Beginning in 1985, Moore's black and white serialized adventures were reprinted in color by Eclipse Comics under the new title Miracleman, and continued publication in the United States after Warrior's demise. Within the metatextual storyline of the comic series itself, it was noted that Marvelman's creation was based upon Captain Marvel comics, by both Moore and later Marvelman/Miracleman writer Neil Gaiman. In 2009, Marvel Comics obtained the rights to the original 1950s Marvelman characters and stories, obtaining the rights to the 1980s version and those reprints in 2013. MF Enterprises. In 1966, MF Enterprises produced their own Captain Marvel, an android superhero from another planet whose main characteristic was the ability to split his body into several parts, each of which could move on its own. He triggered the separation by shouting, "Split!" and reassembled himself by shouting, "Zam!" He had a young human ward named Billy Batson. This short-lived Captain Marvel was credited in the comic as being based on a character created by Carl Burgos. Legal issues with Marvel Comics over the use of Marvel in the title led to MF ceasing publication after 5 issues, and accepting a $4,500 settlement from Marvel. DC Comics revival, Shazam. When superhero comics became popular again in the mid-1960s in what is now called the Silver Age of comic books, Fawcett was unable to revive Captain Marvel, having agreed to never publish the character again as part of their 1953 settlement. Looking for new properties to introduce to the DC Comics line, DC publisher Carmine Infantino decided to bring the Captain Marvel property back into print, and in 1972 he licensed the characters from Fawcett. Because Marvel Comics had by this time established Captain Marvel as a comic book trademark for their own character, created and first published in 1967, DC published their book under the name Shazam. Infantino attempted to give the Shazam book the subtitle The Original Captain Marvel, but a cease and desist letter from Marvel Comics forced them to change the subtitle to The World's Mightiest Mortal, starting with Shazam 5, as all subsequent toys and other merchandise featuring the character have also been required to use the Shazam label with little to no mention of the name Captain Marvel. The title became so linked to Captain Marvel that many people took to identifying the character as Shazam instead of Captain Marvel. The Shazam comic series began with Shazam. It contained both new stories and reprints from the 1940s and 1950s. Dennis O'Neil was the primary writer of the book. His role was later taken over by writers Elliot S. Maggin and E. Nelson Bridwell. C. Beck drew stories for the first 10 issues of the book before quitting due to creative differences. Bob Oksner and Fawcett alumnus Kurt Schaffenberger were among the later artists of the title. As per DC's agreement with Fawcett, DC paid Fawcett a licensing fee per issue, per page for each of the Fawcett characters who appeared, either in Shazam or crossovers in other comic series, with DC's multiverse concept in effect during this time. The revived Marvel family and related characters lived within the DC universe on the parallel world of Earth S. The Fawcett material was still considered canon, with the Marvel family's 20-year layoff explained in the comic as time spent in suspended animation due to Dr. Sivana. While the series began with a great deal of fanfare, the book had a lackluster reception. The creators themselves had misgivings. Beck said, "As an illustrator, I could, in the old days, make a good story better by bringing it to life with drawings. But I couldn't bring the new Captain Marvel stories to life no matter how hard I tried." Shazam was heavily rewritten as of issue 4, and Bridwell provided more realistic stories, accompanied by similar art. The first issue was drawn by Alan Weiss and Joe Rubinstein, and thereafter by Don Newton, a longtime fan of the character, and Schaffenberger. Nevertheless, the next issue was the last one, though the feature was kept alive in a backup position in the Dollar Comics formatted run of World's Finest Comics. Schaffenberger left the feature after 59, and the inking credits subsequently varied, when World's Finest Comics reverted to the standard 36 pages. Leftover Shazam material saw publication in Adventure Comics. The remaining 11 issues of that run contained reprints, with Shazam represented by mostly Fawcett-era stories. Outside of their regular series and features, the Marvel family characters also appeared as guest stars in the Justice League of America series, in particular issues 35-137 for the Crisis on Earth S story arc in 1976. Limited Collector's Edition 58 featured a Superman vs. Shazam story by writer Jerry Conway and artists Rich Butler and Dick Giordano. Captain Marvel, and often the Marvel family, also co-starred with Superman in several issues of DC Comics presents written by Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas, a veteran comic book writer and editor, had been lured from Marvel Comics to DC in 1981 with a specific contractual obligation that he would become the main writer of Shazam and the Justice Society of America characters. The Marvels also guest-starred in several issues of All-Star Squadron, a series centered on the Justice Society and the Other Earth 2 characters written by Roy Thomas and his wife Dan, as All-Star Squadron was set during World War II. Several events of the comic fell concurrent with and referenced the events of the original early 1940s Fawcett stories. With their 1985 Crisis on Infinite Earths limited series, DC fully integrated the characters into the DC universe. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?